Hey all, what is up? Reese here, and I've got a brand new sneaker performance review to bring you. What we're looking at today is the adidas Ultraboost 19. Now this is the first significant update we've gotten to the original Ultraboost platform since that shoe was first released back in 2015. And for this new model, Adidas' designers really wanted to go back to the original performance goals of the Ultraboost. Obviously that's a shoe that saw a lot of crossover success with many people bringing that into kind of the casual environment, but at its core and when it was introduced, it was meant to be kind of their pinnacle of running shoes, and they've sought to get back to that here by taking what they learned about the Ultraboost and just running in general over the past 4 years to craft something that tweaks and improves on the original design. Now, I've already made a video that I'll link down below that talks about kind of all of the changes that they did make and the mentality behind that. But this is a chance to actually talk about how these have performed in the real world. Since I got these in, I've had them for a little over a month in my main running rotation, and I've put a little more than 60 miles on them, doing everything from quick 1 mile runs all the way up to longer 5 or 8 mile jogs, just to kind of understand how they perform across a lot of different conditions. And so we'll kind of talk about the good and the bad and everything that I've noticed about this shoe here. I'm going to break this into two main parts. So we'll start by talking about the upper and everything going along with that, and then we'll focus on the cushioning before coming back together to wrap everything up. We'll start by taking a look at the Prime Knit. Adidas is calling this Prime Knit 360, and even though all four versions of the original Ultraboost featured a tweaked Prime Knit upper, this is a pretty significant departure from any of those. The key difference with Prime Knit 360 is that it actually wraps all the way around your foot. If you remove the insole, the footbed is Prime Knit as well, meaning that they're able to create a really nice sock-like fit where the upper is pulling you down into the shoe and not just kind of sitting on top of the midsole and the footbed. They've reduced some of the dead space in the shoe along with that and created something that just fits naturally pretty well. It has a bit of a snug feeling, but it's kind of a nice like lockdown feeling. It doesn't feel too tight in any areas. And I also found that as I kind of continued to wear these, they loosened up a little bit. And now when I slip on the shoe, it's just almost like a natural extension of my foot. The upper feels very lightweight compared to previous versions of the Ultraboost and just overall less bulky, which I love to see. Now the pattern is kind of interesting, but it accomplishes a few different things. First of all, you can see you basically have a base layer of Prime Knit. On this colorway, it's done in black, and then you have those kind of intersecting lines running across the form a frame on top of the upper that allow for some additional structure as well as durability, while leaving the majority of the upper fairly lightweight. And also by leaving these sections open, you allow the upper to breathe pretty well, even though there are no actual holes in this pattern. You can also see we get a bit more structured stitching up here around the toe, just to make sure that you get that lockdown that you want up here. The other thing they do, you can see these red stitches there. You've got another section right up under here. That provides just, again, a little bit more of that around your foot lockdown just to keep you in place within the shoe. You don't want to be sliding around left and right or up over the front. And like I said, this is a pretty minimal upper, but I never felt like it was not enough, and it's because of additions like that. Now you get kind of some areas that are pretty stretchy and some areas that aren't. Up around the tongue and collar, you can see there's a lot of stretch right there. The opening is actually smaller than what was on the original Ultraboost, but you can just kind of stretch this, get your foot inside, and then it comes back and again helps hold you into place. Now we do see kind of like raw Prime Knit edges there. That's a little bit different than the original Ultraboost, but they were able to cut down on weight, and even with low socks, I had no issues with rubbing there. And then we do have more padding here around the heel. Overall, the Prime Knit felt just really, really rock solid. I never felt like I was pushing it to the edges. I never felt like it was going to kind of let my foot go or like it was clamping down too hard. As far as sizing is concerned, I went true to size. I'm a pretty consistent size 13 in Adidas, and that was definitely the right move here. If you have a wide foot, you might want to go up half a size. And then also compared to the original Ultraboost, I would say these fit pretty close to the 1.0 and the 2.0. Those two felt really, really good in my size 13. With the 3 and the 4, they introduced a little more of a sloppy fit. I know a lot of people started sizing down half a size. I definitely didn't for those, but I kind of wish I had in retrospect. So if you're coming from a 3.0 or a 4.0, I would maybe size up half a size, but if you in general have your true Adidas size, that should be the way to go with this shoe. Moving now to the other key part of the upper, we've of course got that cage back, and this was one of my biggest gripes on the original Ultraboost, and thankfully they've made some changes that make it better. It's still not perfect, to be honest. It's the only thing I would really complain about with the new Ultraboost, but we'll talk about all of that here. So the first things first, the thing that I really like is you can see it's a lot more flexible, and it just moves with the side of the foot a little bit better. That was a problem even as they kind of worked with that on different iterations of the original Ultraboost. They just never quite figured that out. And so we got a different material here that's more of like a textile, kind of like plasticky mesh, as opposed to the rubbery plastic on the previous model. The issue that I still have, however, is just the fact that you can feel the pressure kind of awkwardly running right up here along the top of your foot. That's kind of something that honestly is probably made worse by the sock-like nature of the upper, where there's not a lot above your foot, and so you can kind of feel this pushing down. It's not really a pain, it's just more of a little bit of an annoyance. And so what I ended up doing to remedy that was just to tie the shoe a little bit looser. It's actually at the point where I don't untie it between runs. I can just slip them on and slip them off. I was a little worried that with the stretchiness of the upper, that might prove to introduce some sloppiness, but I've had zero problems with that. So if you do get these and you find yourself having any sort of kind of pinching there at the top of your foot, just give that a shot. It was a pretty easy way to remedy that. It also makes me really excited to see a cageless version of this shoe in the future. The other key issue with the cage is that even though it looks like it might be kind of a mesh material, it's actually solid. And I noticed after a couple of my indoor runs, I'd have condensation built up inside. Now, breathability in general was hard to test on the shoe. I've been running in the Midwest, and so I only had the option to run indoors or a couple days that were outside in the 50s. But the fact that I was seeing a little bit of condensation when I wasn't in warm conditions was a little concerning. That does tell me, though, that the Prime Knit itself breathes pretty well. You might just see a little buildup there. I don't think it's going to be a huge concern because the cage, at the end of the day, doesn't cover too much of your foot. It's just something to note, and if breathability is your key concern, that might be something to look out for. The other thing I will say is I really enjoy this upper, but because of that minimal feeling, it might be a little weird if you're used to structured shoes. So just think about whether that's something you're okay with, or if you're really looking for something that's a little more supportive in the upper, there might, or you might want to consider other options at that point. Focusing now on the cushioning setup, Adidas has said that these feature 20% more boost than the original. Taken at face value, that would seem to imply that these have an incredibly soft ride. The original Ultraboost was known for being really cushioned and plush, and you would think this would just be 20% more of that. The actual result, though, is that these end up being a little more firm than the original, thanks to a couple other changes. I always consider cushioning to kind of be a tug of war between the competing properties of softness and responsiveness, where the original Ultraboost tipped the scales a little bit towards the soft side. These have the responsiveness winning out just a little bit. Now, it's not something that's super obvious just from individual steps. If you put these on one foot and the original on the other, you will notice a slight difference, but it's nothing huge. But what I found that change really makes a difference for is just overall consistency of the cushioning. These feel just as good at the end of a long run as they did at the very beginning. And that was one of my other key problems with the original Ultraboost, is that the cushioning was so soft, I would end up bottoming it out and basically having a second impact point after my foot struck the ground, where I was basically compressing that all the way. It made for a really, really comfortable casual ride, but for running, that ended up being a huge problem when I wanted to do longer or faster runs. And with these, having that responsiveness kind of be the first thing you notice, you get a little more spring back with every step, so you can kind of feel yourself pushing into that next step, and then you also just get that feeling over and over. You don't sink into these quite as much, but it's nice. It's a cushioning where it's comfortable not because you feel that it's comfortable because you don't really feel much at all. It reminds me a lot of Nike's Lunar cushioning, like what we saw in the Lunar Epic. And it's also a pretty similar feeling if you're familiar with the Epic React at all. I could kind of consider it similar to that. And something that, at face value, you might say, oh, well, I loved how soft the original Ultraboost was. But for runners, this is a really nice change. And it's not enough where you're going to say, oh, this is like, I don't like the feeling of this. I think it's just a lot of people are going to find it to feel better for longer. Now, the way they were able to achieve this, despite adding more boost, was through a couple different ways. First of all, they actually fused the boost together using a different method. I don't know if that actually affected it, but definitely that could have impacted how kind of the boost itself operates. They also moved the heel cup. Well, first of all, they turned it into this heel frame and kind of corded out. That didn't really have much of an effect other than weight loss, but they did sit it down into the midsole. It used to sit on top, so basically right up here is where the bottom of this heel cup would sit, but now you can see it actually is attached into the midsole, which firms up the cushioning. You're not going to be able to get full compression of that boost under there. They also, although it's hard to see, increase the size of the torsion system, so you have it basically expanding further on the foot. And what that does, along with helping with lateral stability, is provide kind of a rigid piece of material that wants to force the shoe back into its original shape. So with every step, it's kind of springing you forward. Now, overall, I really, really love this cushioning. And I think, they did a great job improving on one of what I thought was the key issues with the Ultraboost. The only thing I wonder is whether they could have done it with less boost, whether they just used the same as the original or maybe just a little bit more and made smaller changes to the heel cup and the torsion system. This is a really heavy shoe, and despite the fact that they lost weight with the upper, the heel cup, and the cage, they still end up basically tipping the scales at roughly the same weight as the Ultraboost 4.0, which was the heaviest of the 4 versions. It makes me wonder if, they could have gotten a similar ride with a little bit less weight. To be clear, I don't really think that's a problem. It's just more of a consideration. For a shoe like this, you're going to really enjoy it for kind of training runs and kind of everyday runs, at which point the weight doesn't matter. I would love to see maybe Adidas bring Prime Knit 360 and a more minimal cushioning setup to a different, more race-like shoe. But for the purposes of the Ultraboost, this works out really well and just completely changes the feeling of the shoe mile after mile compared to the originals. One last thing to touch on with the design, we do have a updated traction pattern. This is actually taken from the Speed Factory AM4 line. They also added some grooves that basically will help a little bit with traction. It still is Continental rubber. And as you can see, even though I've put 60 miles on these shoes, you really can't tell from looking at them. They've held up really well. And so I think that bodes well. I had no issues with any of the Continental versions of the original Ultraboost, but even though they made a change, it's definitely not going to negatively impact how long of a lifespan you can get out of the outsole. I think it's pretty obvious that I really enjoy this shoe. Adidas did a great job of learning from some of the key flaws on the original Ultraboost and iterating on those parts while still kind of staying true to the heritage of the line. Even things like the cage, which I still don't love, were improved to the point where it didn't actually hamper my running experience. And so I'm really excited just to see where this model goes. I don't know if they're going to do the more iterative approach like what they did with the 4 versions of the original Ultraboost. I'm also excited to see what a cageless version of this can look like. But overall, it's been a sneaker that I'm really happy with, and I think a lot of people, whether you liked or had some problems with the original Ultraboost, are going to get a lot out of this as a running shoe. With all that said, that's going to wrap up this performance review. If there was anything I didn't cover or that you're still curious about, be sure to leave a question down below. But with all that said, thank you so much for watching and have a great day.